Hello and welcome then to this week's episode. It is episode 9. In this week's episode, we're going to be looking at end and send routine. So we looked at the kind of start of lessons last week, but this week we're looking at the end of them and what we're going to do and how we're going to finish them and how we can make sure finishing a lesson properly can mean that we can basically manage the behavior, not only in terms of kind of finishing off what we've done in our lesson, because we might have had great behavior, but we're also going to look about how it then sets up for the next teachers and their lessons to come. So let's do this. Hello, welcome then to this week's episode 9. Like I say, we're churning through these episodes. In this week's episode, we're looking at that end routines and how we're going to finish the lesson to make sure that we've got the best behaviour in the lesson and for future lessons. So by having those good end and send routines, it's important because we're teaching students about having structure and routine. Remember, structure and routine is essential for all good behaviour, because what students recognise is by having that regular pattern of how things work, they know what to expect, so there's no surprises, particularly if there's any additional needs for students. Having a regular routine can help them to understand what's coming, so that it's not going to throw them, it's not going to cause any misbehaviour. So by having that, it just means that they can then be prepared for what's coming. So behaviour management, at the end, the routine that you have means that you can be really quick, really swift. When you're setting this up, it's going to be really crucial that you have that routine, because the first time you do it, you're going to need a little bit of time. Finish 10 minutes early, 15 minutes maybe even, just to get that routine set up, so then students know what to do. And as you get better and better, you can end closer to the end of the lesson. And ideally what we want to be doing is trying to always finish on time. Now, one of the early things when you start off as a teacher you really panic about, and I know certainly I used to run lessons right up to the bell, and you'd always be late finishing because you're really conscious of having dead time. And it's not a problem having dead time as long as you know how to fill it, and we'll talk about that hopefully as we go. So planning for the end of the lesson and having things that you can do is really good to kind of like, you can kind of expand or squish your kind of lesson to end on time and to make sure you finish, so by having questions, and we'll talk about that when we're dismissing students. So good end routine helps it to be really clear, to make sure there's no disruption when we're packing away. This can be one of the areas where there's, you can have a really good lesson, but at the end when students are packing away, they're kind of throwing books everywhere. That's when things get misplaced, or you don't get all calculators back in if you've lent things out or equipment out. So making sure you've got this good routine is really important to making sure that you get everything set up so you're good to go. So first part really, and we'll go through the kind of the list of the steps at the very end, but the main thing really is giving yourself enough time. So when you start doing this, start off with a good chunk of time, and as you get better and better, you're going to shorten that time. The first thing really you want to be doing is making sure you're using that time to issue out rewards. As you go through the lesson, you can obviously talk to students about how they're doing, but you want to make sure that you're being really explicit at the end of the lesson as to those people who've met the expectations, issuing out any of the praise and reward that we talked about in terms of the power of praise, but also then following up on any issues where you might just want to say, can I talk to the such student at the very end about their behaviour? So it's time to kind of focus on rewards, to help motivate them for the next lesson, to remind them about those people who put in extra effort, so that they leave thinking like, oh, I've achieved something today. I always think that any student who leaves a lesson should be able to, because the classic one is when the parents say, what did you do today? And they go, nothing. Okay, it's about that ability to remind them about what they've learned. So you're rewarding them, saying, lots of effort today, loads of achievements, even if it's small things or big things. Make sure you give that time to go through the students. Now, if you've got your seating plan, going back to when we talked about seating plans, you can annotate that as you go throughout the lesson. So this is your time to bring up your seating plan if you've got it laminated on a piece of paper, and you can go through and say, well, I recognise you this, recognise you did that, and you put the scoring points, or however it is, depending on your behaviour policy, you can then award those points, whether it's onto your Sims or if you're using things like class charts, whatever system you've got for behaviour, you allocate those points in that time. So again, there's none of this kind of, people sometimes say, oh, I don't have time to issue the awards out, because you try and do it after the lesson. If you build time into the lesson when they're packing up, that's incredibly important. So then you can make it happen. And one of the key things really around when you're issuing those rewards is to have an activity. So when you're finishing up, have some sort of prepared activity as part of the kind of the reward section. So in that 5-10 minutes that you're going to use, you've got an activity. Now that could be something as simple as like your exit tickets. It could be doing things on dry whiteboards. That's what I prefer to use. So I'll put some questions up, say, here's an exam style question. You can have 2 to 3 minutes to have a go at this whilst I issue out the rewards and have those conversations. So that's where you've got that time really, but it's making sure that that time is purposeful and planned for. And you can have a bit of flexibility in that depending on where you've got to in the lesson. So you might decide that you're going to do like an easy question or a harder question, or you may even want to say, right, list for me 3 things that you've picked up and learnt today that you're going to take away and apply in the next lesson. There's loads of different things you can do in terms of, I'm not going to get into the kind of the teaching aspect of what activity you're going to do at the end. It's just using that activity to kind of fill that slot. It has purpose. It's not just a filler so you can do rewards, it's to assess how they've done. We'll talk about it in a second, but the main thing is have that there so you can issue the rewards whilst they're doing that activity. So that's the first one. The second part really is to give you time to prepare for your next lesson. So we talked about being prepared to meet and greet. If you use that time when they're doing that activity to prepare for your next lesson, you can get your resources ready. You can have any sheets that you've got out for your next lesson. You can bring up the PowerPoint you've got for the next lesson. You can freeze the screen or whatever it is you need to do in the classroom, depending on how you're working. But you can certainly, have another PowerPoint ready to go. So as soon as the students come in, or you're getting your do now task ready so that when students come in, you're ready to hand that out. But you can use that time as part of your end and send routine to get those things prepared, to have that activity ready for the students. It's just going to mean you can have a smoother crossover and transition between lessons. And that's normally where, if you don't use the end of the lesson to prepare for the next lesson, then you're failing to have that meet and greet on the next session. So use that time to get ready for that. You can also use the time as part of your end and send routine to prepare or issue the homework. So you might say, here's your homework for your next lesson or for next week, however it's your setting homework. Or you can use it to collect in homework. So again, it's another opportunity. How we fill that time at the end, I'd say between 5 and 10 minutes is key. And some people say, well, that's wasted learning time. It's not if it's part of the bigger package to your lesson. Remember, the lesson, if you've got an hour-long lesson, depends on what your structure of your day is. It's not all just about learning and learning, because you can only learn so much in that time. If you're thinking about the cognitive load and how much they can take on board. You've got your beginning part of the lesson where you're introducing something, you're doing some recall. You've got your main part where you're doing your teaching and learning, and then you've got your end where you're checking things in terms of what they've learned, or following up and using that time for homework and things like that. So with that homework, then you can check to see what they've done. You can issue new pieces. You can inform them about where they go next. You can kind of summarize what it is they're doing and what they're working towards. And that links really onto our next part, which is that at the end of the lesson, you've built in that time really, so that you can use it for behavior primarily, with that kind of student progress as well. So you're using the end of the lesson really to say, right, okay, what have we learned this lesson? So you can do your check-in, so you can build any questions. Now, depending on how much you want it to be teacher-led, or how much do you want it to be independent, will vary how you run that activity. You may want to make it so it's totally student-led, so they're doing their own kind of mini assessment and you're checking on that, or you may want it to be teacher-led. But make sure that you set it up and however works for you in terms of whether you're going to use that time to prepare for your next lesson, or whether you want it so that it's something you want to actually go through and assess with them as part of your praise and reward. So again, depending on how you want to do it, with exit tickets, dry whiteboard, one of the things that I like to do with them is I will do a mixture of different activities in that 5-10 minutes towards the end of the lesson. I'll probably have one question on the board that they're working on. That gives me time to do things, to do my rewards, to do the setting up for the next lesson. And then once we've checked and marked that, then I might just go around and do some individual questioning, with kind of some real kind of low stakes kind of checking what we've done, going through the steps, particularly when we talk about maths. I teach everything through steps, through the I go, you go, or I go, we go, you go. And so what I will do at the end of the lesson is I will then maybe put up a question on the board and I'll just say, right, okay, step 1, what do we do? And I might do a think, pair, share and go around the room. The other things you can do is use technology. So if you want, as part of your end and send routine, if you want to use things like Quizlet, you can have a bank of questions. And what I do is I add to it over time. So I'll have a bank of questions, and if I'm kind of trying to gauge how long I've got left of the lesson, I might just bring those questions up and do some random questioning, some knowledge recall as part of the end and send routine to fill the gap in as we get towards the end of that lesson. So that's how we kind of like use that time, and we assess what they can do. We can assess progress. It's going to help inform you about your next lesson, particularly if you want to do exit tickets. And again, there's different schools of thought on that. Don't get too bogged down with it. You use what works for you. I'm not into these kind of like checking in with fads and bits and bobs. What I feel is like you use what works. It's interesting. I was just reading something today about people saying, oh, we shouldn't use exit tickets. use them if you want to use them. Just make sure they have impact and make sure it works for you, because one of the criticisms about the exit tickets is then it's extra work later. You got to go back and check and assess it, but it's not if you set it up right. So you get the students to swap, mark them, collect them back in. You use it just as a flick to go through, and maybe you can, you know, give some points, put a mark on it, say if they've got a point, etc, etc. Use it how you want, make it work for you. Don't create a system that kind of ties your hands really. So I'd use those different systems, whether it's dry whiteboards, whether it's Quizlet, whether it's I'm going to do a no hands up or a hands up, or like a different ways of assessing what they've done. You could even do like a head down and do like a score from 1 to 5 so no one else can see. Loads of different strategies. Pick what works for you, but then gauge how they've done. That's how we come to the end. So we've done all that, we've done all the assessment stuff. You've then used the opportunity, and this is really key when you're packing up. So this is kind of like coming to the last part of the end and send, is have those routines set up. What I like to do is I get everyone's attention, so whether it's a hands up or it's a 5 4 3 2 1, everyone looking at me, tracking me around the room, and I'll say to them, so they all sit still, they put the hands down. And again, different schools have different systems. Some people might show me empty hands, or get people to put the hands on the desk, or just getting them to sit up and track you. Whatever it is, just make sure they stop, put everything down. There's nothing worse than when students are still fiddling around with pieces of paper and moving. Get them to stop, put everything down, track you, so that means they're looking straight at you. And then what you do is you literally go through the steps of what you want to do. So I'll say to them, I want all of your blue books back in. You're going to pass them all to the front row, end row. Keep to the same routine, so it's the same every time. I say I want all the dry whiteboards back in, so they're all going to come to the front, or they're going to go to the side. Whatever your routine is, keep it the same. And then you say I'm going to collect them all up. And then what I do is I always say to them, and I make this really clear as part of the routine, that they don't go until I say go. And I might just say, right, go, and then clap my hands. Whatever the signal is, you signal that to them, they then do the activity. And I always like to add a time frame to it. Now the time isn't to get them to rush, because they'll end up starting throwing books across the room. So again, it's about managing behavior. What the time is there for is to encourage them to move as swiftly as possible. And again, you can use it as part of the reward thing. So I'm looking for people who are being sensible, be really clear with the kind of explanation, and being really kind of explicit about what you want to say. It's about passing them, it's about being sensible. Those people who do it in the right way, I will give praise and reward to, and use their names as you're doing that. So basically you're saying, right, pass all the equipment, go. So you go, well done Jimmy, well done Bob, Betty, whatever. All right, say their names, thank you, you're doing that great, that's brilliant. Okay, we've got 29, 28, 27, we've got 30 seconds. Well, nice, but you can add the sense of urgency with the time, but control it with the language. So rather than being desperate, going, oh come on, you need to hurry up, go. It's not about doing that. It's about saying, we've got 25 seconds, it's nice and steady, let's get the stuff in. Okay, we're down to 20 seconds. Good, I can see people are moving, that's brilliant, well done. Behind your desk, thank you Jimmy, that's brilliant, I really appreciate that, well done, great. We're moving. Use the language as you go to praise, and then when they're ready, we finish up with them all stood behind their chairs or seated. Again, depends on what you want to do with your own policy. But I like to finish with them stood behind their chairs, chairs tucked in, ready to go, bags on the back, all stood there, silent, hands up for silence, or whatever is your routine, and then we're ready to dismiss them. And this is the crucial bit. This is the last part of the end and send. And basically what we're going to do is we're just going to talk them out to the room. So we move, then you move to the door, you're ready, because we're going to be meeting and greeting on the corridor next. And what we're going to do is we're going to dismiss them row by row. Now this is your opportunity to check the room, because we want to make sure everything's set up. I like to normally go with the front row, because then I can see each row as they're dismissing. I can pick up any issues, any rubbish on the floor, etc, etc. You can do it from the back row. Again, it depends when the door is to your classroom. But you dismiss them row by row, and you might even make it so it's a bit of a kind of competition. Again, keeping it sensible when they're packing away, that the first row that's ready gets to be dismissed first. This is particularly crucial if it's the end of the day. Last lesson on a Friday, notorious for being tough, particularly like myself teaching a maths core subject. Other subjects as well can be like this. But you're there on a Friday afternoon, they don't want to necessarily be there, they want to be out there quickly. So you say, right, the first groups that are ready and sensible will be dismissed first, and you dismiss them first. So you make it a bit of a competition, but it is about being sensible. Again, this end and send routine is about behavior. It's about making sure they're dismissed in an appropriate way. So then what we do is dismiss them row by row or table by table. So if you want to, you can have different. So if you've got 3 different groups, 3 different tables ready to dismiss, and they're first, you dismiss them first. Again, beautiful if it's on the last lesson on a Friday. It's really, really easy then to kind of big up those people who are doing the right thing all the time. we dismiss them. If it's another lesson within the school day, then it just means that you're ready on the door to dismiss them from the door sensibly. Checking they've got the right uniform as they go, because remember, it's about consistency and standards at all times. We don't just check uniforms as they're coming in, we check them as they're going out. So if you've got a system of ties, blazers and stuff like that, you check it as they leave. So you send them off to their next lesson ready to go, and you insist on it before they leave. Check those things, and again, just remind them if anyone's done something particularly good, say it to them as they leave. Just that constant reminder and praise, because we all appreciate it. That's what's really, really important to us. So that's how we finish up. We basically then send them off into the corridor, and we're ready to start our next lesson perfectly. So that's our basic end and send routine. I'm going to go through, just remind you of those quick checkpoints. So our first thing is to review any objectives or anything we've done in the lesson. At the end, we're going to summarize what we've done. We're going to then maybe remind them what we're going to do next lesson as our second point, so a preview what students expect in the next lesson. We're then going to assign any homework or collect any homework. We're going to then look at assessing any kind of the progress that they've made. We're then going to provide a brief recognition of, in terms of rewards, what students have done. We're going to give them time to pack away the materials, and then we're going to finally dismiss them from the door as they go. So that's our steps. Hope that's been useful, and we'll see you in the next video. Okay, take care.